I am joined by Robert Griffin III, James White, Field Yates Meanakimes. All right, so first play we're going to look at, 2nd and 2, one of the Patriots' first offensive plays. What's going on, everyone? Tayler Kyles here for CLNS Media, coming at you with another episode of Pat's Daily, brought to you by our good friends at Prize Picks and Game Time. And today, I am joined by good friend of the show, Matt Waldman, the creator of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio and senior staff writer for Football Guys. You know him, you love him. He is one of the most detailed in the football space, and I love having you on, Matt, every draft cycle, especially when it comes to these skill players, because I always say it, but every time I watch your videos, I am transfixed by the level of detail and the things that, I always try to look at things like, what would Matt look for in this play, right? Like, how would he try to break this down? I do my best, but you're on a different level, buddy. So I'm so excited to have you on, talk about some skill players that could potentially be fits for the Patriots. But before we dive into that, my man, quick check-in. How the heck are you and what have you been up to other than your great work at RSP?
I've been doing great. I mean, other than walking my Levon Kirkland-sized middle linebacker of a dog, trying to relax a little bit before I put together the post-draft RSP. For those who aren't familiar, I do a pre-draft and post-draft version of the publication. You get both for one price at mattwaldman.com. And so really just doing a lot of podcasts, a lot of radio hits, and, getting a chance to share the work and just talk about this class. It's a fascinating class in terms of, especially from the skill positions, because, you got quarterbacks who are, Patriots may not be interested in the quarterback right now, maybe a backup, but there's 12 guys that I think that could make a roster, even if it's not like super, there's nobody that I think is super high end.
Mm-hmm.
So there's maybe potential to get there with one or two guys. And then running back is very deep, and that's a fun class to discuss, but you laugh because the complicating factor is that a lot of these guys, you might see two pairs of guys go in the 5th and 6th round to the same team and kind of cancel each other out a little bit temporarily. So that could always be a little bit of a disappointment from that standpoint, but it's a rich class. And, so that could be a lot of fun. Wide receivers, we're going to dig into here, and tight ends has some intriguing names up at the top that, we're not going to get the next Brock Bowers, even though there's some folks advertising that. I don't think we're getting anywhere near Brock Bowers from this class, but we might get a Sam Laporta. We might get, another Tyler Kraft, or folks like that. Some decent names.
And that's why when we get into this, when it's like we're talking about receivers, a lot of it, I'm going to open it up to pass catchers, because I feel like a lot of the tight ends in this class, the way they move, I don't love kind of lumping tight ends into that jumbo slot role, because I think there's so many things you have to fill into that and do that effectively. But at the same time, they have some unique skill sets. And at the Senior Bowl, seeing these guys separate, I got really excited as someone who at the time really didn't know who a lot of them were. It kind of got me excited and thinking I need to dive a little deeper. But you mentioned quarterbacks. I got to ask real quick, all right, because the talk of Pat's Nation right now is whether or not Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter is going to fall to the Patriots. And a lot of that is going to fall on whether Shedeur Sanders ends up being picked before the Patriots are on the clock. Do you see him as someone who is worthy of, say, one of those premier picks before New England, or do you see him as a guy who could potentially even fall out of the first? Because I feel like people are projecting him all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way the NFL looks at things and how they are as a bunch of traditionalists who, you think of Bill Polian and how he saw Lamar Jackson. Now, 30 years ago, maybe that fit the NFL more from a standpoint of that they were looking for a template of a quarterback. They still would have been wrong about Lamar Jackson for the dumb reasons that they were. But the fact of the matter is they were looking for pocket passers only. And I think that, and Lamar is a great pocket passer. He always was. But the fact of the matter is that the NFL still has a bit of that mentality. I would say from people I talk with, maybe 60% of the league has still got that Bill Polian mentality. So if you look at Shedeur Sanders, he might be the safest of the top 3 to 4 quarterbacks on the board. So from that perspective, if you're looking for a guy who plays from the pocket, who can create a little bit outside of it, but is more of a timing rhythm passer, who can do a little bit extra, he might be the safest pick. So they'll probably take him early because they see enough for first round potential. But I look at his upside, and I think that's where the NFL gets it backwards, is that, maybe if they would stop being so desperate about picking quarterbacks because they've had such bad hit rates, but there's more to it than, oh, I picked a first-round player and it didn't work out. Like, they don't develop well. So, and then they get the wrong guys to try and consider and give those massive opportunities to. If they were able to be a little bit more even-handed about not being so desperate, maybe a guy like Shedeur Sanders in an ideal world would be a second or third round pick who develop within a year or two and give you like high-end Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield, Tua Tagovailoa type of play where you have a strong team around him, and then he can have moments where he elevates the team, but he's not the Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson type who carries that team when they need someone to carry him when things aren't working. And I think that's where Sanders probably isn't a first-round pick from that standpoint. If that's what you define a first-round pick to be as a franchise player, or like, let's say, a star franchise player, I don't think he'll be that. I think he'll be maybe a borderline franchise option or a journeyman starter who can give you high-end production and a good offense.
You talk about that good supporting cast. So maybe not a great situation with the Giants, even though they have neighbors, but the Browns, they're getting old, but they've got some pieces. So maybe that's a kind of destination where they feel a little bit better about investing in a guy like that.
Yeah, very possible. Though I would also look at that group and say maybe they play to next year, and they continue to add a little bit more depth and talent. Because what I hate to see is them reprise Baker Mayfield, which was you get a decent quarterback in terms of what he could become, but he's going to need time, but also he can't carry the team. And then you have all this talent around it, but you don't have the guy who can make those 3 to 5 plays in every game that's going to be the difference. And I think Mayfield may have developed into that now, but he needed pretty much a career near-death experience to actually get kind of humbled and change his approach to the game. I mean, his wife even mentioned that. So.
Such is the way of former Browns and Jets quarterbacks, but the Patriots have someone who's on the opposite end of that spectrum, a kind of guy who can really carry the offense, as we saw last year with Drake May. Not a whole lot of help from the offensive line or the supporting cast, but we're hoping in year 2, obviously we're going to talk about it, they need to add. But there were some young guys that weren't able to be very productive, but I think have more talent and more upside than they were able to show, and that's Jalen Polk. That's Javon Baker. I know you and I were pretty high on Javon Baker and what he could potentially become last year, but of course, just the system he was in at UCF where you're not moving around the formation a ton, the route tree's pretty limited. It clearly didn't translate, and it was an uphill climb for him at the NFL level, some other stuff. But really, when you just talk about on the field, and then Jalen Polk looked good in the summer, really kind of carried that in early in the season, but then the quarterback situation didn't do him any favors. He lost his confidence, and then really it was a lost rookie season for him. So I'm curious, what was your take on what they put on film? Obviously, Baker wasn't a whole lot of film on him. What was your take on what they were able to show last season and what they could potentially become now that Josh McDaniels is back running the offense?
Well, I mean, I think the consideration here is we got to look at the Patriots overall and say this has been a slot receiver convention for many years. Yep. And one of the things that I think people have a right to be critical about with the team is that it seems like every player they draft at wide receiver is some form of slot player or could play slot or should play slot. And you already have this, and it seems like fans at least believe Demario Douglas is the slot receiver. But then you're like, well, Kayshon Boutte could be like a flanker slot, and he had to play some split end out of position. And he's compelling in some regards. Most compelling would be the slot, but you already took that piece out of the equation. Same thing with Polk. Because Polk's not really a true split end. Mm-hmm. He's kind of, I think he's more of a flanker as well, more of a flanker slot type as well, who can give you some contested plays, but we need to see more nuance with his release packages, being able to defeat press coverage. I don't know if he really truly has the explosion to be a top end X. Mm-hmm. So, then you're competing with Boutte in that regard. And Boutte has shown more as a pass catcher and is a little bit more advanced at this stage. And kind of reminded me of a Jarvis Landry, Robert Woods kind of amalgamation of a player. He's kind of a mix of those guys. And he would be ideal in that spot. But, and I think he'd be better than Demario Douglas in that spot if they really gave him the opportunity, but I don't think they're going to. Douglas is more explosive, but he's more of that short area explosive player who they feel like he does what we ask him to do, but there's not much more beyond that we put into it. And then you look at Polk, and it's just kind of like, is he a guy with a position on this team? And so, or with Baker, and you look at Baker, I mean, I think for me, the issues with Baker are more off the field than they are on it. So if he can show the maturity that the team expects from him, I think he can give you a player who could play out, X or the flanker position. I think he could do either one. It's just a matter of him. I think that them feeling comfortable that this is someone who's going to be in the game and in the practice, like pretty much the way that they would expect him to be day in and day out. So somebody's got to go because they need an X. They could do even better probably with a more explosive flanker, or they decide to look at this with a fresh eye and say, and this is not going to be popular with Patriots fans, but they could look at it and say, well, either we're going to capture more of that explosion from Demario Douglas and use him in creative ways where you can get him more down the field, and will that work? Or do we look at it with a fresh eye and say, Kayshon Boutte could be a little bit more of an explosive guy, can give you maybe more toughness after the catch, though he's not as explosive as Douglas is, but maybe he can give us a little bit more versatility in that role, and maybe he's a better fit there. I just think that this whole depth chart is open for like a revamp, and they're gonna see who competes well, and they're gonna let the chips fall as they may, including adding some guys. Of course, you've got Stephon Diggs, so he is essentially the flanker and the primary option, but he's also a slot flanker type. So it's like I'd almost joke that the Patriots, all they could do was pick slot receivers for years, and now they've slightly moved to the right, where they're now a slot flanker hybrid type, as opposed to like they've got to expand that. And I don't necessarily think it's the scouts. I think it's still the leftovers from the Belichick era, and how that these guys got to, as Dante Scarnecchia described on a podcast with the Ringer podcast a couple of years ago, saying, look, in January and February, Bill gives us a list of guys, and we go through them, and then we tell them what we think. Well, if that's how you're scouting as a coach, and they're doing that, and Bill's was effectively acting as the GM, what are the scouts doing? Just collecting data?
Yeah.
And then they're spending years doing this work. Like, they're studying film too, but then the coaches come over the top and do this like in the 11th hour. There's not enough time to formulate a board and to be able to build and help with these scouts. And I've been told that it's always been a good resume bullet header as a scout, be a New England Patriots scout, because it was a successful team, but it wasn't one you wanted to stay on for a long term, because maybe it's because of this. Maybe it's because you have ideas of how you could help out the team, but it's not meshed together with the coaching staff who comes over the top. And instead of it being trained and saying, okay, well, let's let our scouts do that now. This is what we're looking for. They're having guys who, and you can see it in some of the picks. I mean, some of these early picks are head scratchers, and guys that haven't worked out, or you're looking at and going, you mean to tell me we picked these players and we could have had, you could name 4 or 5 more, or the round that they were selected. And I'm not even just talking wide receivers. You guys can see that, and I can see that's why Belichick probably was asked to move on. As great of a coach he was, not everyone can do everything. And it's okay that he couldn't do that stuff at the level that, people would expect him to be as a coach. So this year, I'm hoping Mike Vrabel isn't part of that old Belichick school of how they scout, considering that they were able to get A.J. Brown during his regime. And he probably wasn't happy with the Treylon Burks pick that came through the trade.
Was not.
Yes. So I would expect that Vrabel's probably a little bit more progressive and may have observed what Belichick did and said, great coach, love playing for him. But yeah, let's do things a little bit different. Let's involve our scouts a little better.
Just wanted to give a quick shout out to our friends over at Prize Picks. If you want to get in on the action with us, head over there, use code CLNS. You get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game.
I feel like we actually did a very thorough dive on the Patriots receivers. So now I actually do want to transition into the draft because, like you said, there's a ton of Z's, there's a ton of slots, but what we need is an X receiver in this offense. And that's an easy thing to say, right? But realistically, if you're talking about a prototypical X, they just don't exist in nature, right? It's kind of like a left tackle where you just don't see a big human who's also fast and moves well and is fluid. There just aren't a ton of those guys. So you kind of have to pick your battles a little bit. Personally, I feel like Trey Harris is one of the better true X options in a class where I feel like it is very kind of Z slot heavy at the top if you're talking about ideal roles. But from your perspective, who do you think is the best or the best X candidates in this class to maybe fill in that role that's been vacant with the Patriots for years now?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you're going to look just purely from prototypes in terms of height and size, then Jaden Higgins has a shot. The Iowa State kid who's 6'4", 214. He's probably more of a T. Higgins X than he is, or a Mike Williams X than he is like, everybody else. But I mean, he has decent build-up speed when he is on with his release package and knows what he has a plan for what he's doing. His feet are very quick. When he doesn't have a plan, he looks a little bit like he's running in wet cement. But I think that's not as worrisome because he will develop. He has some of the best mitts in the class.
Oh yeah.
Now I would like to see him increase his hand strength, because I think that he makes difficult catches and has strong hand-eye coordination, but at the catch point in contested scenarios, he does get the ball knocked away a fair bit more than I would like to see. And so if he can get a little bit stronger and position himself just slightly better at times, I think that may be helpful to him. Another guy I like who's you can get later, and I think that he might be the best candidate, is Isaiah Nayor of Nebraska. He's 6'4", 218, 220, ran a 4.4. He played at Wyoming and was, tore it up in Wyoming. So then Texas offered him an opportunity, and he transferred there. And it was Steve Sarkisian who was basically bragging about how his 1-2 punch of Xavier Worthy and Isaiah Nayor were going to tear things up, and that Nayor tore his ACL. So then, it took him about a year to get through that, and he ended up at Nebraska, and he started to really show what he looked like pre-injury last year. He can win the contested balls. He can get behind you. He's physical at the catch point. If he had just been able to show more based on where the ball's thrown to him, that he could have shown more in traffic as a player after the catch. I watched every catch. I didn't see opportunities to really showcase what his vision looked like and what maybe his full range of agility and vision might have been in those situations. He might have been in my top 10 to 12 receivers in this class and easily would have had like a high-end contributor grade to begin his rookie career. So those are two guys there. I get Trey Harris. I think he's so good after the catch, and I think that he could expand his skills with press coverage, that he'd probably be a better starter at flanker, if you ask me, where he doesn't have as many obstacles to face the top man. Mm-hmm. So I would prefer him as a flanker in that regard. Now, if we're going to go non-traditional, I would say Luther Burden is the best receiver in this class. And I know a lot of people think it's Travis Hunter or Tet McMillan. And I think Tet McMillan's more of a Drake London, Nico Collins type, where if it really works out and he can figure out how to use, you're going to look at a guy like Matt Harmon, who's a terrific analyst of wide receiver talent, who tracks success rates with routes. And I'd say the area where maybe my work complements Matt's is that I may not track route success, but I use, over 100 points of criteria to track what wide receiver coaches look at, and in terms of techniques that receivers need to exhibit. And so it's one thing to get separation against a college defender, and you used a good technique to do it, where it's like, how would I best put it? It's like certain ways to release. You involve things like 2 quick releases and double ups, where you're stabbing with the foot twice in consecutive steps, or different hand work to involve that. Well, and we're seeing more and more skill with receivers in the high school game moving on to college, and they get coached up more by private teachers, and more 11-on-11 football or 7-on-7 football, and more flag football, where they get to run a lot of routes. So they know more technique-wise, but the craft in which they use that technique is still lagging behind.
Right.
So when you look at Ted McMillan, he uses technique, and he wins against guys with technique because he's strong, he's long, he's got enough quickness. But when he's facing NFL caliber cornerbacks who are more developed, he doesn't get separation because he doesn't know how to use that artistry of pacing, what type of technique to use in the right situation.
Kobe Bryant, I thought, was like a really good example of that. He was all over him, and there just wasn't that. I was like, Ted, urgency, physicality, my man, like, you got it. This shouldn't be close, but
yeah, it just takes a little bit of time. So McMillan, to me, is more of a guy that might end up being more of a Drake London type, where you put him inside and let him run to the outside, as opposed to asking him to separate against the top corner and be that guy consistently. He can do it occasionally, depending on the route, but he may need more time, and he may never get there. Luther Burden, though, is, most people go, well, he's probably more of a slot or more of a flanker, and that's ideally the case. I would say that's ideally the case. But his ability to win the ball in the air, to track it, and to track it early. Now, people will look at Travis Hunter and go, well, he's way better with the ball in the air. He makes these amazing acrobatic catches where he's falling away and the defender's all over him, and he's making the stab, and he's doing all that. Well, I want you guys to go back and watch your new wide receiver, Stephon Diggs, and watch his highlights. And I want you to notice that most of the time, he's never having to do any of that. When he's executing a jump up and through, which is that turn and catch on a back shoulder fade or an underthrown ball, more often than not, when he leaps, he's leaping straight into the air. His back is straight, his back is to the defender, and all he has to do is catch the ball, and his feet hit the ground if he's not hit, and he can either get yards after the catch or he gets both feet in bounds. A lot of the guys that people go nuts about on YouTube videos and you see on highlights are the big, tall guys like Colin Johnson, former Texas receiver, who's had 3 or 4 stops in the NFL, who makes these amazing George Pickens-esque leaps where he's like leaping backwards for the ball and reaching over his head, and it's really impressive athletic display, but his whole body is open to the defender, who could just reach back and grab the rake at the ball, and the feet aren't in a position to get both in bounds most of the time. They can't land on their feet to run after the catch, and now they're having to add a technique called embracing the fall, where they have to turn so that they don't land on the ball and have it cough loose. So it's more, they're making themselves do more to work harder rather than work smarter. And that creates more of an opportunity to drop passes or have them defended. And so when you look at Travis Hunter, he makes some amazing grabs, and sometimes he has to do it, but sometimes he's late to jump compared to Luther Burden, who jumps on time like Stephon Diggs, and now he just is straight up in there, makes it easy. And also Burden uncovers well, late in plays. On unscripted plays, he uncovers well. He can bait defenders in that regard, and he tracks the ball extraordinarily well, even over his shoulder near the boundary. So if you needed Luther Burden to be your X, I think he's kind of like that Brandon Ayuk type of player who people look at Ayuk, and that's where Matt Harmon and I agree on him, is that he's Brandon Ayuk type, where you look at him last year and you go, all he did was run RPOs and screens and then occasionally went out for a deep pass, but he's mostly, his profile doesn't look great by the models that people use. But if you look at the routes where he's successful and the techniques that he used, it's very much, that's the same thing that happened with Brandon Ayuk. People looked at Ayuk and said, that's all he does is runs screens, RPO, slants, on the occasional play action, deep seam. He's not a route runner. But now you look at Ayuk, you go, he's one of the better route runners in the NFL.
Yeah.
And Burden is that same type of guy. So you could start him at flanker like a Rashee Rice or split him like Rashee Rice in a quick hitting offense. And that could work well, but he can expand. His game is expansive enough that you could use him in that regard. Another one I'd probably add who's less would be Isaiah Bond. Isaiah Bond at Alabama, Texas and Alabama. I thought as a overall route runner, he was better than Matthew Golden, who I have rated slightly ahead of him. Yeah. And Isaiah Bond's among my top 5 guys. He's like a T.Y. Hilton type. And Patriots fans are familiar with that. T.Y. Hilton could play the X when they needed him to be the X with Andrew Luck and win those contested balls, but he's ideally more of a flanker or a slot guy. But Bond has that palpable acceleration. He can win late in plays. He's a very good route runner. Just gives you a more explosive profile. Those guys probably would be better served, and then the rest of these guys who might be X's, who are like taller, they all have a little something that's missing. I would say from their profiles that would say probably no. The last one I will say is the one that's the most interesting to me, and that's Savion Williams, the TCU offensive player. Weapon. Yeah, exactly. Because he's rated high enough that I could see him being an X in this draft class, or a flanker. He runs decent routes. He is much better pass catcher than his contemporary Quentin Johnston was coming out. He has a few drops, but they're identifiable issues that are really correctable, and he makes a lot of plays in those areas that are good, where there's not some root problem that it continues to happen over and over again, like with Johnston. And he's great after the catch. Then you watch him in sets as a runner on gap plays, and you in the Wildcat, and you realize that this guy's a little more advanced of a mover and understanding of how to set up, pulling blocks and outside runs to be able to work back outside in and things like that. And you're like, this guy could be an even better running back. And to me, he's Cordero Patterson.
Yeah.
The difference is that maybe Cordero was a better open field runner, because he's probably the best open field runner I ever studied in 20 years. He's up there with Adrian Peterson, Matt Forte, like that. But he's also, the thing with Cordero was that translating the game plan to the field each week was a challenge for him as a wide receiver. He wasn't great in a McDaniels type of an offense where you had to be on the same page with your quarterback and read the defense and make those late adjustments. He wasn't good at that. And a lot of players don't translate that well. Savion Williams, if he doesn't have that issue, you can interview him and look and go, okay, he doesn't need to be heavily coached every week to get a little bit out of him. Yeah. And he can be like a regular receiver. This guy could be a better version of Cordero Patterson, both as a runner and a receiver.
I think the Quentin Johnston stuff kind of made me hesitant, but I agree. Like, watching him run the ball, I'm thinking that does look like Cordero. And I don't like to throw that around often, because I don't think that people appreciate just how good Cordero was. Like, once they turned him into a running back, I think it was like 2016 or 2018, he was one of the most explosive players they had, and was a major reason they were able to go as far as they did that season. And McDaniels actually talked to us, I think it was last week, about how he was simplifying the offense, because it's not Brady anymore, right? There's no reason for you to force receivers to learn all these different mechanisms and years of, building on the offense. Now it's Drake. This is fresh. So make it something that's palatable for everyone and build on it as you need to. So Savion Williams could be a very interesting fit in that kind of scheme, knowing that Josh already has experience using guys with his kind of skill set.
Yeah, and I mean, say they want to use packages with the Wildcat with Ramondre Stevenson and Savion Williams and take Drake May off the field occasionally. I know fans may not love that, but there are certain situational scenarios where maybe they want to do that, and that could be really effective on occasion, as long as they don't overdo it. But you also get an X receiver who you can occasionally motion around and let him run those perimeter plays. at that level. I mean, this is a guy with legitimate running back contact balance. I mean, I loved Ramondre Stevenson coming out. He was one of my favorite backs in that class, and I thought he was more than quick enough to be an outside player, and that was before he lost all the weight. But he had contact balance. Defensive lineman, he could run through certain types of shots that a lot of guys can't. Savion Williams has that same kind of contact balance, and he's a taller dude and faster. So he's a fascinating player who is probably one of the most exciting options pre-draft to see what ends up out where he ends up.
Just want to give a quick shout out to our friends over at Game Time. Head over to Game Time and use code CLNS. You get $20 off your first purchase. You can see the Red Sox. They're opening up next week. Patriots back here in Gillette Stadium. Could be good this year. Stephon Diggs just signed. So fun times down here in Foxboro. And if you want to get to a game again, head over to our friends at Game Time. Use that code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply.
You mentioned Ramondre, and now I've got to bring it up because this feels like the kind of running back class. The Patriots are looking at downhill guys. They're looking at scat backs. There's a chance they could double dip, but they already have Ramondre. They already have Antonio Gibson. Those are two very talented players, but the issue with both is the ball security. So I'm curious for you. Now, with Ramondre, he did get better, but it's not like fumbling hasn't been something you've had to talk about every season of his career. Looking at last season, considering how bad the offensive line was, like over 100% of his yards were after contact, all the number of times where defensive linemen are trying to get at the ball before he's even crossed the line of scrimmage. Do you see the fumble issue with Ramondre as correctable, where he can continue to be the main featured back in this offense? Or do you think it's a significant enough issue that it would be wise for them to invest in a running back, maybe even early on in this draft?
I think it can get better because he didn't have a bad profile before. Like in college, I did a study last year where I looked at 6 years of my rookie scouting portfolio data. I didn't want to go back 20. I looked at 6 just in the recent past 6 and saw who was below the threshold that I say is good enough to ride the ride of being an NFL contributor. And how many times did that player earn top 20 for 24 production at the position? And how often did they earn top 10 and top 3? And what I found was out of those 6 years, if you just did it once, it counted. It was all right. Out of the 6 years, if you fell below that threshold, only 10% of the players of that 6 years actually earned top 24 level production at their position. Only 10% did it. That's only 10. And then only 3% did it as a top 12, top 10 player. It was like 1% if you even got top 3. So, like, it matters that you got to hold on to the ball. But I would say that if you've done it before and you've done it well, I wouldn't be too worried about him. There are a lot of backs with great ball security in this class, too. I mean, guys who have never, Kyle Monangai of Rutgers, he's carried the ball, he's touched the ball 708 times in 4 years, hasn't fumbled the ball yet. Now he's more of a slow Ray Rice type or a Ray Davis type, and we haven't seen a lot with his receiving game because he was the main cog as a rusher. Determined runner, not extremely fast, but quick. And as a backup, if you're looking late round as a backup who could push for a role on this team, he might be able to. He could give you that. But there's a lot of guys who can catch the ball really well and who are, who have that explosive element. And then you also have some guys who can give you a little bit of both. And that's really exciting too. Like a guy like, to me, one of my favorites in this class is Taj Brooks. And I've talked about him a fair bit, the Texas Tech runner. He's had 984 career touches and only 5 fumbles, which means he's only fumbled once per 196.8 touches during his career, which is, that's star caliber stuff by my scale. And think of like him as the quicker but fast technician, like Le'Veon Bell or Frank Gore. He likes to compare himself to Josh Jacobs, which I would say like Frank Gore, but but I get it, but that, guy, he can run through you. He can run around you. He mitigates he mitigates a lot of losses. And if the Patriots are still figuring out that offensive line, he excelled at Texas Tech, even if the boxes were smaller, but they played spread, so the boxes were still advantageous to the defense.
Right.
He still was the best in this class at turning lemons into lemonade. And I jokingly call him Lemonade because he operated a lemonade stand all the years that he played there, because he was turning 7-yard losses into 2-yard losses, or 4-yard gains, or a 3-yard loss into a 15-yard game, and he can catch. He's a good pass tracker. He usually makes the first, if not the second man miss, and often or some combination of running through somebody or breaking a tackle and making someone miss. So he's not deadly fast, but he gets meaningful yardage in what you would call projectable NFL scenarios. So he's one of those guys. Another late round guy that there are a lot of these guys going to go late that are fascinating, but a guy who holds onto the ball well, who fits that Damian Harris type. Damian was good, would be Montrell Johnson. He's he's from Florida. He's faster than you would expect. He's only had 3 fumbles and 632 touches. He can catch reasonably. He's more of a straight line runner. So he's not unbelievably exciting, but he can get the job done. And if you're looking for someone that McDaniels isn't going to yell at because he's going to keep the offense on schedule, Johnson's like a low end version of that could be good. Woody Marks would be the more exciting version.
I just took him in my last mock.
See, there you go. He's 1 fumble per 176 touches. He had 880 touches over a 5-year career, and only 5 fumbles in that time. And he's only had 2 fumbles in his past 550 touches. So he holds onto the ball. He's a pretty good pass catcher. Joquavius, I think that's his full name. From Mississippi State. He could catch the ball at Mississippi State. You had to do that in Mike Leach's offense back in the day, and before that he was there. He also is a pretty quick runner, so he's kind of in that mold of a guy like Trevor Etienne. Trevor Etienne's another one in that mix that you might like, who can catch and who can run and is quick and explosive. Rashard Smith is not high on that list in terms of he's passable as a ball carrier in terms of security, right, but I would say a very high upside runner who's only played the position 1 year and was a receiver before that at University of Miami, who can catch. But those guys are good. Savion Williams, look, if you look at all his touches, he's had 1 fumble and 216 touches. So it's not like he's bad either if you're considering him. So those are some of the late round guys. Another one that I just like is Mario Anderson. He's had 3 fumbles and 632 touches in 2 years at South Carolina and at Memphis. And that's great. And then he played at Newberry before that, and I have no idea if he had any fumbles there, but I don't think he did. He was the Harlan Hill winner, which is like the next level below's Heisman Trophy thing. And Joique Bell, a former Detroit Lions running back who played well, was a Harlan Hill Trophy winner. Anderson can catch. He's quick. He's about 215 pounds. He didn't get an invite to the combine, but Chad Ryder and I both think he fell through the cracks. We had a chance to talk about him, and we both were kind of like, wow, that's great. We both like this guy as a late round option. So he seems to run away from SEC corners and defensive backs repeatedly at his size. So he might have some hidden quickness there. And then maybe the earlier round guys that fit, from this class, if you're looking for an heir apparent quickly, Jarquez Hunter, very good gap runner who can catch, who's got a lot of speed, maybe not a great pass protector. A more conservative pick would be Jordan James of Oregon, who's a very good ball security, catches well, more of a James White type to me than he is, than that. Like Hunter's more of like a powerful Deion Lewis, in terms of quickness. but a little bit more pop, but not as savvy as Lewis. Whereas Jordan James is more of a James White type who could probably, if you needed him to start and be a good starter for you, he could probably do it. So, I mean, and we just scratched the surface, and I've spent 10 minutes talking about these guys.
This is an incredible class. And plus, Mike Vrabel signed Dion Lewis. He tried to make a thunder and lightning thing happen with Derrick Henry, and obviously I don't think Josh McDaniels would be upset if he got somebody who is in the mold of a James White. So I think we all know there's a whole lot of guys in this class. I'm still working through them, so now I have more names on my list. Thank you, sir. Now, the last skill position we're going to talk about is tight end. This is another one. A lot of depth, different types of flavors. So I'm curious who you think is the best fit for a Drake May, Josh McDaniels system where it's going to be a lot of stuff over the middle. I know Mike Vrabel's talked about wanting to make things easier for the quarterback. So guys with reliable hands, I'm guessing, just at least effective after the catch. Maybe if they don't necessarily excel, but, take what's there. Who do you think fits the most in that mold in this tight end class? Probably more in the mid rounds.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Colston Loveland's at the top, so people are going to kind of – I think Harold Fannin, if they want a Sam Laporta type,
Harold
very much –
let's go.
Yeah, he's very much like Sam Laporta. It's just where he fits. If they're going to try and fatten him up and make him a blocker, then that's the coach being mad at the GM for picking him and then being able to say, see, I told you that I wanted an inline guy and he can't do that. So if they can avoid that kind of political issues, between coach and GM, then if they're on the same page with Fannin as a Laporta type, he's good, very good, reliable pass catcher there. I'm a fan of Mason Taylor, the LSU receiver, tight end, and I think that he's probably not a first rounder or even a second round pick, but I think he's almost as good. I think he's better than Fannin. I have Fannin my number 3. Mason Taylor's my number 2 tight end. He is fluid. He's very fluid route runner. He's smooth at the catch point. He's tough. He can break tackles after the catch. He can work over the middle. And he's a decent blocker. I think of him as a Mark Andrews type of player with a little more upside as a blocker. How much they want to exploit that is a different story. But, I mean, this is Jason Taylor's kid. This is his mother is, Zach Thomas's sister. So he's got some pretty good bloodlines, from that standpoint.
A whole lot of Miami in there, though.
I know. Mike McDaniel might be, there might be some things going on there. But I would say he might be going to the wrong McD. But I would say Taylor's one of those guys I could see having like a 12 to 14-year career and being a Mark Andrews, Greg Olson type who can give you a little bit of everything and be an 800, 900-yard receiver.
Because that's what I've heard about Mason Taylor is that he wasn't used the right way in LSU's offense. Even looking at him, I had a feeling he was going to be one of your guys when I first kind of got a wind, and I'm glad that's the case because it's a lot of it is some projection. It's some you got to look at the mover and the actual talent to see what he could be at the next level. That's the fun of the draft. And Matt, as always, I love having you on this time of year. Thank you so much for your time, brother. But before I let you go, please let the people know what you got going on. Obviously, plug the RSP. Let everybody know where they can get it. Incredible resource.
Yeah, I appreciate it. The RSP is this is its 20th year in publication, and it's a analysis of quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. It is one of the 2 most purchased draft guides by NFL people. For cross-checking purposes, according to recruiters like Alex Brown, who works at Ole Miss now, and I also contribute some of my work to coaches who are doing some scouting to work with the players that they're going to be working with, who are NFL guys. Will Hewlett has been gracious enough to talk about that. He works with Caleb Williams, Brock Purdy, Anthony Richardson. So I've contributed reports to them so that they could be able to, start their film study together and talk about things that they need to work on and develop some game plans with that. And it's a great fantasy resource because, I write at footballguys.com. So I do 2-in-1. The early RSP, the pre-draft is more of a football heavy type of resource, unvarnished look at talent. And then I give some fantasy advice for people drafting before that. before the NFL draft. And then the post-draft is really a much shorter document, but it gives you cheat sheets and ADP studies and depth chart analysis with everybody who's on the depth chart and what their contracts look like and how I project things falling out. So I can tell you things like Ladd McConkey is going to be a top 15 player in 2024, and Marvin Harrison Jr. is not going to be the next Randy Moss. He's going to be a low-end wide receiver 3 at best, and that's kind of how it played out. So, I kind of give you the best of both worlds. You can find it at mattwaldman.com. That's $21.95 for basically 1,500 pages worth of content. Very easy to navigate, not as scary as it sounds. Most people love it, and I've been telling people jokingly, pleasantly shocking readers since 2006. My new slogan might be, the best way for people to think you're lying to them is to tell them the truth. So, I know I've given it a hard sell, but I promise you most people are like shocked at what they get.
Couldn't tell, one of the hardest working men in the business, and I appreciate you carving out the time for me, buddy. Thank you once again so much, and thank you all as always for watching. Now take care of yourselves, take care of each other. We will see you next time. Peace, y'all. The Patriots adding veteran Stephon Diggs brought much-needed credibility to their wide receiver room. But in a group full of slot types and possession receivers, New England still needs verticality and an outside presence to truly unlock Drake May's special arm talent. But today, I'm breaking down 3 specific prospects who I think are the best fits to add some big play potential to the Patriots passing game. Jalen Noel is one of this receiver class's easiest projections. The two-time captain improved every year at Iowa State, going from a second-team All-Big 12 selection in 2023 to earning Big 12 first-team and Special Teams Player of the Year honors last season. The 194-pounder put up a position-best 23 bench reps at the Combine, and he brought in over half of his contested targets last season. Take this deep grab against UCF. Iowa State comes out in a run look with 2 tight ends, both receivers tight to the formation on opposite sides, and the quarterback in pistol. But with the Cyclones facing a second and long situation, UCF keeps himself safe by playing single high press man. Noel chops his corner's 2-hand jam, dips the shoulder to keep himself clean, and takes a hard jab step to the corner before separating on a post. The deep safety does play this pretty horribly, but Noel tracks down the slightly underthrown ball to set up his offense deep in scoring territory. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to become members of Patriots Press Pass here on YouTube for more breakdowns just like this, as well as a ton of other great bonus content.